So if you've got a practice of, say, 3,000 patients and each record's worth 300 Australian dollars, then you're sitting on an asset there of around 900,000 Australian dollars. But the actual information's already on the dark web and being actively exploited. When it's moved into the cloud, this is where essentially the cloud has economies of scale. We can protect essentially the information that we upload to the cloud.
Today on Good to Great, we're joined by Robert, a seasoned enterprise security architect and a thought leader with over 20 years in cybersecurity and leadership roles. Rob's career spans strategy, architecture, risk management, and across governments, higher education, global enterprises, and he's delivered high-impact security transformations in Australia, the Middle East, and the USA, and served as CSIO for the University of New England, leading major cyber initiatives as well. Rob, you wear many hats, director of HelloRisk, instructor for the International Security Consortium for SABSA, and an active industry leader for ASA WA and a treasurer for the ISC WA chapter. Your passion for security, for architecture, education, and your ethics make you a driving force in shaping the future of your profession. Welcome to Good to Great, Rob. Now, I'm going to get straight into it. Something that's always swept under the rugs, I think, with a lot of dental practices, group owners, and I think there's a lot of focus on it from a corporate, dental service organization perspective. But Rob, why cybersecurity? Why cyber attacks? Tell me your thoughts on why should we care?
Hey, James, great to be here. Look, I think we always have cared about cybersecurity attacks. It's just something that perhaps we didn't focus on so much. The real reason is that the chance of a cybersecurity attack occurring, the likelihood was very, very low when the game started. When the internet was connected, the chances of it happening to you and your organization were very, very small. And so we just considered that, that kind of technology attack to be something that we might get insurance. We'd get business disruption insurance. Maybe that would cover it. We'll pay the premium and the risk is treated. But what we're seeing happen is a 10% year-on-year increase in cyber attacks. And that's meaning, that if you follow the frog in the boiling water analogy, the idea is that if you throw a frog into boiling water, it will jump straight out. But if you put a frog into cold water and slowly raise the temperature, the story goes that the frog will not realize and will in fact die and cook in the pot. I would not condone cruelty to frogs, so please don't try this. But coming back to the point, that is what is happening, is the chances, the likelihood of a cyber attack is increasing 10% year on year, and that is our boiling water, and we are the frog. And at some point we need to realize that actually, things like business disruption insurance isn't going to cover a cyber attack that is becoming more and more likely to occur. And in fact, we are now saying, and have been for many years, that it is only a matter of time. Though that is one thing that will happen, is that all organizations will be attacked. Now, it doesn't mean that all organizations will lose all their data. So it's up to us now to make sure that we don't. So to take appropriate risk treatment actions to make sure that when it does happen, because it will, that we're prepared and ready for it.
Look, the Australian dental industry will grow by about $1 billion in the next 7 years. I mean, great opportunity for dentists and the dental industry. What risk does that raise from a cybersecurity attack perspective? And can we learn things from other regions? I mean, I know the United States walks the fire, but $1 billion added to the bottom line of an industry, I'm sure that brings a lot of its challenges, and the good and the bad.
Yeah, so that growth is wonderful, but that will generally mean there's a growth in people, process, and technology, and physical environment as well that we'll use for our practices. As we grow, we'll need more buildings, we'll need more information communication systems, we'll need more integrations, and we'll need more data. We'll be collecting more data. And what's really interesting about the data that we collect is the value of it in our eyes as the owner of that information, and the value of that in terms of our patient and what they consider it's worth, and the value of that information in terms of what it will sell for on the dark web. So that the dark web is a part of the internet where cyber criminals will go to buy and sell private information that they use to attack us, to gain access to our assets and to try and defraud us. So what we'll find is that we can go onto the dark web and we can pose as a customer and look at what the going rate is for a medical record. And that going rate at the moment is around 300 Australian dollars
per patient.
Yes. Now that could be more. It could be up to around $7,000 if it's somebody famous, and the information in there is, particularly leverageable against them. I think a lot of people in the dental industry might come across people who have issues with their teeth related to things like bulimia. And that information, they probably would be very sensitive about having that spread around. And so that's an example of a record that might attract a lot more than just $300. But on average, we'd say $300 is kind of on the minimum end of what each record is worth. So if you've got a practice of, say, 3,000 patients and each record's worth 300 Australian dollars, then you're sitting on an asset there of around 900,000 Australian dollars. And that's just sitting inside of your practice.
It's usually in a corner cupboard.
In a corner cupboard.
Like a pantry style corner cupboard. And then there's like a whole bunch of wires and a server and everything. So that should be in a bit of a safe. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, exactly that, because that information, that's what it's worth on the market. And if we've just got it protected by a couple of doors or a lock or someone in reception, that is might as well be gold. It's easily convertible to money on the dark web.
No, well, you're saying that if someone broke into a practice tomorrow, any practice in Australia, any dental practice in Australia, and picked up the server, walked in, opened the cupboard, tore the cables off it, didn't touch any of the computers or screens or anything else that might be perceived as expensive, and just picked up and walked out with that server, that could be used on the dark web.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you'll see it, once it's purchased by someone who wants to use that information, they'll leverage that into attacks and earn a lot more money than that. This is, that each individual will then be, defrauded potentially. And we're all getting those phone calls where, people are scratching at the doors, rattling the locks. And, the worst thing here is that if the attackers do this virtually through the internet, you may not even be aware that content has been stolen at all. You can still use it. It's still sitting in the corner under the coffee cups, but the actual information's already on the dark web and being actively exploited.
Well, I may just challenge you on this question right now then, say server or cloud. Like, what's your thoughts on that, considering I could walk out with a server or even hack into a server? That actually signs a high level of risk there, Rob. So asking the question, server or cloud, where do you stand on it?
Yeah, look, it's a long running discussion, but I would say this: when an attacker in the picture you drew, when the attacker comes into your organization, they can follow those blue cables around your network to find where that data store is and take it or gain access to it. In a cloud environment, those blue cables really just lead to a router, and that goes to the internet. So you're already making it more difficult for the attacker to gain access to your information because it's not sitting there in something that they can physically grab or attack virtually. When it's moved into the cloud, this is where essentially cloud has economies of scale. We can protect essentially the information that we upload to the cloud to the appropriate standard, to the appropriate degree, using proper cryptography, using proper backup mechanisms that are maintained and managed by crypto experts and backup experts. Whereas generally the box in the corner there isn't managed by cryptography experts. And the reason I mentioned cryptography and the physical hardware is because, or the backup hardware, is because essentially those are our two major arms in the fight against attackers and ransomware particularly. If we have good backups, we can always restore the information they steal from us. And if we have good encryption, they cannot use that information.
Okay.
So knock yourselves out. You've got a whole lot of encrypted information. If you start breaking it with today's technology, it will take around half the lifespan of the solar system to to get access. Those are the numbers we're
So
dealing with.
encrypted data into an Azure server or multiple Azure servers and contingency servers, AWS and so forth, that would be far better for the business or any dental practice or organization than a server on practice or on-prem. Is that what you're referring to?
Absolutely, yeah. Look, I have a lot of friends in the industry. Some of them are experts in managing equipment on premise, and even they say that it's a losing game. It's a zero-sum result here, that we spend a lot of money maintaining these systems, and they're not that much more secure than if we left the front door open. So moving to the cloud, as opposed to running on-prem systems, is definitely the way everybody has gone. I would say, honestly, the days of kind of lifting and shifting to the cloud are largely complete. I think most people that were going are there already. I think there's a lot of organizations that are still trying to squeeze the last bit of investment out of the hardware, the capital expenditure of on-premise equipment, but ultimately moving to the OpEx model, or where essentially largely all the fees of cloud are paid on a rental or a monthly basis rather than an upfront fee, which we would do with on-premise equipment. It means it's easier to manage our budgets. We're not having those big spends at the beginning of each cycle. There are other opportunities from cloud in terms of providing better service to our customers, nearing 24/7 availability to book appointments and things, maybe access the results of our sessions, at 2 a.m. There are features that the cloud can deliver that enable our business. So really want to focus on not just moving to the cloud from a security point of view, but moving to the cloud for a security point of view, and to be able to provide additional service that's above and beyond what we could do with on-premise.
And you've answered that question.
Oh, if I may, I just wanted to tell you a little story we learned late in 2023. There's an organization called UniSuper that's really well known for managing superannuation. And what they discovered is that they had put a lot of their data in the cloud with Google. But what had actually happened, due to an administrative mistake, their entire environment in Google was deleted without any ability to recover it. And this is something that I think is a bit of an eye-opener to us in terms of cloud, and understanding that you ultimately want to look at multiple cloud providers. And the way that UniSuper recovered in this situation is that they had an additional backup sitting on a different cloud provider out of the reach of Google, and they actually restored their environment based on that. Now, they still had, I think, around 3 weeks downtime. And that was a problem. They had a lot of calls from people worried about their super. But the lesson here, I think, is not to put your eggs in one basket. If that's on-prem, don't do that, because they will break. If it's in one cloud provider, that's also potentially dangerous. What you need to look at is a span of cloud providers, potentially isolating your data in the event of a serious catastrophe like this. Now, Google says this is a one-off. They say it will likely never occur again, but now there's a precedent.
Just some clarity around encryption. So what you're saying is it's better to be on a cloud-based system, Azure servers, where the data is encrypted on travel and rest. At CareStack, we have 3 servers, 2 Azures located at certain capital cities, and then a third which is isolated out of the Microsoft Azure network. You never know. What does that mean to you, knowing that there are contingencies, in place with a technology company to be able to sort of think of that beyond that, and even having a third contingency in place?
Yeah, look, I guess to start with, the science behind cryptography and the way cryptography is implemented is really, really critical. It's not just a matter of encrypting the data, it's the whole crypto system around that. That's what we call it. And that's things like, how do you create the password or the encryption key that you encrypt the data with? If you do that in an unsafe way, then the encryption you've leveraged isn't safe. It doesn't deliver what you're expecting it to deliver. So the easiest way to attack cryptography is actually to to attack the ecosystem around it. Go for the people, the processes. There's great stories if you're an Enigma fan from World War II, the German encryption system. The operators using that kept putting in the initials and dates of birth of their girlfriends, and of course it was customary to sign off with the Hail Hitler, which meant from a cryptanalysis approach where we try and break the cryptography, we knew the same content was in that message at the end every time, and that helps us perform something called frequency analysis, which helps us break the encryption. So even sort of just normal, common bad habits can put weaknesses in your encryption system that you'll not be aware of and that the attackers will take action and will exploit. So what we want to do is put that encryption process under the care of someone who's certified to manage encryption, that understands that ecosystem, and make sure that those weaknesses are not introduced into your encryption.
Yeah, I think kind of alluding to another, digress on a question here. I gather being able to invest in different cloud platform, servers or cloud partners, in this case AWS and Azure, that would come at a very large cost. So you'd have to be a significant size of an enterprise to be able to support that kind of security network, and some of the smaller vendors or technology partners may not be able to meet that sort of expectations. So what's your thoughts around that? Of course, you'd like to see some of the smaller players in the market have an opportunity to scale, but I mean, we're in a bit of a, we're sort of moving into a bit of a storm from a cybersecurity perspective. What's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, so there are many cloud environments have been configured to sort of meet the requirements of certain sectors of the market. So one of those is an example with all of the universities in Australia got together to have a storage spot for their intellectual property, because universities do possess a lot of intellectual property, and they had common needs. So all the universities got together and created a university cloud. We see this with government, where a number of different agencies across Australia all have similar requirements around the data privacy and collection of civilian data. So they also have common needs, common requirements. So we create GovCloud to treat those. So essentially what people in the dental space needs to do is coalesce around a cloud provider that can understand their unique requirements, and they largely will be the same within Australia, and then provide the security patterns and the security solutions to meet those practices requirements. And doing that at scale means that the price can be brought down significantly without compromising the quality of the service.
Just off topic here, has there been a dental practice or group or an enterprise that's been attacked in Australia recently?
Yes, quite a few, but probably one of the most interesting was Dental One.
Okay.
And they were actually attacked by a hack group known as AFV. And look, these groups are actually, they're not kids in basements. That's a story we put on Hollywood, for making a nice film. These are criminal organizations. And you can get to know them. I was working in one area, and we actually started doing research on the attackers that were attacking us. And the thing was, they knew our organization so well. They knew what software we used. They knew what our login pages looked like, and they faked them and tricked our students into giving away their information. So we went off to understand what their motivation was. Who are these people that are shaking the digital locks on our digital estate every night? And we were able to put faces to names. In this particular instance, it was the Mabna Institute, and they are quite well known. There's sanctions against them in the US. They're allocated, or they're earmarked as a known terrorist group, and they actually work out of Iran. And what they were doing was selling Australian information. They were making money from that information and then providing that to the Iranian Republican Guard, who was then using that money to buy rockets to shoot down airplanes and ships passing nearby.
Taking data away from Australia all the way there.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
I wanted to demonstrate this to the CEO at this organization. And so I had a picture of our organization on the left, and then I had a picture on the right of an Iranian gentleman holding a rocket launcher. What's the connection? But honestly, it was, in this instance, it was too strong a message. The organization could not fathom, could not deal with the ethical issue of sponsoring terrorism. And I think a lot of Australian organizations who think I've got cyber insurance, I'll be okay, or we'll just pay the ransom, what they're not thinking of in the future is that these are known terrorist groups. And if you pay a ransom to a known terrorist group, you're breaching Australian sanctions, makes your company act illegally. And so what we're seeing now is potentially that a payment you made 5 years ago could be unearthed in 5 more years to show that you did actually pay a terrorist organization, even if you said you didn't know. That doesn't, ignorance is no excuse. And organizations could be sued by the government for supporting, for breaching sanctions, which are very well established, without sort of realizing that. And then there's been this whole black market or gray market area where companies will hire other companies to pay that money on their behalf. But the government's onto that as well. They're saying that would not translate in this instance, that the Australian company would still be liable. So it's really, really dangerous to be paying these ransoms to people we don't know who they are and what lists they're on.
I'll circle back a little bit. You've highlighted the need to move to cloud and the benefits of that from a cyber perspective. Just circle into the server side. Backup. Why would a customer need to move to cloud if they have a backup? And what's the secure measurement around that or aspect around that? And where are the risks? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so backups are generally the easiest way to get access to the information you're looking for. So attackers, like the group I mentioned before, they're well established. They know what their tactics, techniques, and procedures are. And if they discover that you've got an on-premise backup, well, that information will be easier to get than the actual information on your systems, because guess what? You've packaged it all up into one nice file for them to download. You've actually done their work. You've created a little box of all the information in your organization, the very information that they want. So backup systems are typically one of the first places an attacker will try and gain access to. Once they've gained that information and exfiltrated it, which is a fancy way of saying stole it, they will then erase your backups. And a lot of malware we've seen, ransomware, will specifically go looking for those backup systems first because they know that's your way around this. You won't pay the ransom if you've got a backup and the data's encrypted. So they go looking for it specifically. And there's some really great examples of malware. Well, that's the very first thing it does. It sends off a thread looking for your backup systems whilst it starts encrypting your current production systems.
That's fascinating. And IT providers or IT partners in Australia, are they prepared?
Look, I don't think so, because I think a lot of organizations aren't aware of the value of the information they're storing. And so, we might consider a medical record might be only worth a few dollars. And so maybe we only spend a few dollars protecting it. That's the problem, is we don't have security commensurate to the risks and the value that's at risk. And I think that's something that Australian businesses need to look at, is actually quantify what these things are worth. What is it worth on the black market? What is it worth to my patients? And what is it worth to me?
Okay, well, look, let's hit the next question. Are there any regulatory standards, government benchmarks outside of the standard ICO family ratings? And what responsibility does the government have with data breaches, security, and where do they sit in all this?
I think they sit on the profit side. When there's a data breach and they leverage a fine against that company, does the money go to the victims? No, it goes to the government. And so I think the government's in a conflict of interest situation here. They set the laws that result in them being paid money, and you and I, the victims, we get nothing. So that is just backwards, and that is not going to provide the appropriate regulatory requirements we need in this industry. And that's where we're seeing in the US citizens taking it on themselves. And that's fascinating and something that we're going to see here soon. And this is where there was an example of Happy Bear, which is a dental practice in America, and they lost a significant amount of medical records. And the government is still in the process of fining them. But in the meantime, a class action was leveraged by the customers of that practice. And the Happy Bear ended up settling that class action at around $600,000, which, give or take, is kind of close to the $900K we were just talking about. And that was what they ended up doing, is they paid every single customer a minimum of $500 for the damage that they'd caused. And some customers received up to $7,500 for their payment for the disclosure of that information. Now, the class action was able to prove that the security processes in Happy Bear were not up to snuff, that they weren't at the level of the industry standard. And so they were able to sort of prove that the organization had not done its due diligence. It wasn't acting in due care to the patients appropriately, and hence the fine. So there'll be a fine there's a fee for recovery that the Happy Bear will have to pay to get their systems back online, around $2 million. Then there'll be the class action of around $600,000, and then potentially a fine on top from the regulator for the leak of that personal information. And this is all happening over multiple years. So the breach happened 2 years ago, and we're still seeing it play out, much like we're seeing with Optus's customer base, where we're seeing a continual eroding of that base. And we believe that's all based on these prior
So you're
prior
saying
attacks.
a class action in Australia is possible in the next 5 or 10 years, or next immediate, let's say 60 months, let's say 5 years, that's possible?
Absolutely. I think, look, civilians are going to get angry at the government taking their money, their danger money. You know, like, I lost my record. Why does the government get paid? And the government's not planning on passing that on that we can see in any legislation.
It could be a loss of reputation, damage of trust. You know, I mean, we've got not only single site practices, which are quite vulnerable. They're not as, you know, they don't probably have the structural integrity of some of the larger organisations. But then when you look at the larger organisations, you know, they're enterprises and dental service organisations built on trust. A loss of data, a breach of data, cybersecurity could weigh on their community trust, brand trust, cost them thousands, if not millions.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's one area, though, we can look at the positive side and say, maybe we can distinguish our practice because we take cybersecurity seriously. And maybe we can make our practice have a better product because we've understood what the security requirements are and we've got appropriate controls in place.
On the enterprises and DSOs, especially the larger corporate groups and even the small to medium groups, they see disruption as a disadvantage for a short period of time, right? So you've got to move people, you've got to move process, and you've got to move software. And in reverse as well, for a period of maybe 3-6 months, practice to practice. And if it's a large organization of anywhere up to 50 to 100 practices, this could be quite challenging. You've got that disruption, but then on the other hand, there's disruption of cybersecurity, especially what you're saying is that you could walk out, you know, with a server under your arm and put it on the dark web. And then not only that, you're also saying that there could be risks around backup also being quite a weak contingency. Where's your stance on this? Like, what would you say to a DSO? What would you say to a group owner? What would you say, you know, on the risks of that, say, disruption moving to cloud versus disruption on the other end of town?
Yeah. Well, do you want planned disruption where we are going to go into a phase where we're moving to the cloud? We're going to, you know, maybe there's an extra expense of running the two environments. We'll run our on-prem until we've migrated to the cloud. There could be an expense there. That's planned disruption. We know it's going to happen. We might put on additional staff to cover any teething or any rubbing points. We might inform our customers, look, hey, you know, we're going through a transitionary process. Be aware. You know, there are a number of things we can do to smooth that process. We'll have none of that warning with a ransomware or a cyber attack. So better the outage you plan than the one you don't.
Yeah, the majority of
it might be the same length. I was working in an organization recently where we suffered a significant attack, and we had around, I would say, about 5 staff working full time on resolution, and that took over a month for that organization to get back on its feet. So, you know, the times we're talking about in terms of moving to the cloud, a couple of months of transitory issues perhaps versus, you know, a month of absolute blackout. And, you know, some organizations, this particular organization, you know, had a very time critical process occurring. And of course, the attack happened just at the beginning of that time-sensitive process, so they weren't able to complete a lot of business processes, which actually sent them back a year. So the attack was for the attack was for a few days. The impact took a month to clean up, but actually, the problem wasn't really resolved, or the results of it weren't resolved for another year.
Wow, that would cost them into the
millions. That was a significant decrease in their profitability.
Now, for dental owners, group owners, C-suites and CEOs, for them to choose the right technology partner in the practice management space. Now, of course, the practice management software is becoming, it's actually moving beyond than just being a record-keeping tool. It's the center hub, the wireframe of the business that touches every tool and aspect. And yes, it carries patient record, both financial and personal. What is your thoughts around the advice or suggestion you would give in selecting or choosing the right partner, and what would be the key attributes or aspects you'd be looking at for the right vendor or partner for?
Yeah, look, that's a really, really good question. And I think it comes back to something we mentioned before around making sure that cloud provider understands your requirements. If we are a dental practice and we go to a cloud provider that's mainly focuses on cars sales shops, they're not going to understand the unique nature of the data we've got. It's health information. It's not, car information or customer information. So making sure that the cloud service provider understands your requirements is absolutely key. But then going further than that, making sure that they are actually demonstrating that commitment to cybersecurity. And that might be through compliance with a number of standards, but standards aren't really enough. They don't tell us about emerging risks. So we really want that cloud service provider to be able to demonstrate that they take security seriously by showing us the processes they go through. We should be able to request information for auditing in terms of when did you last run your business continuity or your disaster recovery plan? What were the results? When did you last get the software tested to see if it has vulnerabilities? Were any still remaining after 1 month? Did you treat them? It's okay for software to have vulnerabilities. We need to be aware no software is vulnerability free. We just might not be aware of them. What we're looking for in a healthy software development environment is that those vulnerabilities are found and addressed quickly. If we can do that, then that's what we have against these emerging risks. But the idea that something can be 100% secure is a concept that is no longer really practicable in today's society. We must consider that any system, any individual can be attacked. I was flying over here, I was standing in the airport, and I was listening to somebody in the airport talking about how their grandmother had someone knock at the door and tell them they're from Telstra and then come and sit on their computer and steal all their money. Now, that's an evolution of an old attack, of course, which we've seen over the telephone or over the internet. And we're seeing new attacks coming like this. What's to stop somebody doing that in our dental practice?
Anything in relation to resellers coming into the market, right? So they haven't established themselves. They see an opportunity, especially around phone systems, and they integrate into pretty much a lot of the practice management softwares. How does one build trust on that? And of course, with phone systems, to a reseller, that data actually is also it's housed by that reseller, right? Like where do you see the risk? And of course, how does one vet, and how do we build trust with, of course, all those vendors that are coming in? They see an opportunity. It's a growing market. There's a gap, of course, in a pain point. There's a need and a solution required at a phone level from an AI perspective, phone system. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So let's imagine our business is a physical shop, right? So, and we've got a front door that we lock and close every night because we know we've got $900,000 worth of records on our premises. But integration is scary because integration means we add another door on our business now, which you can open, and that walks into another business that sits next to our business that we are integrating with. And it's exactly that. You've now created another doorway. It's another way that an attacker can get in. And we now need another set of locks for that integration door between our two businesses. and appropriate security controls, maybe a security guard to stand there and make sure that the wrong people aren't coming in. And that's what can happen. A lot of time with integration, people look at the convenience there and think, oh, it's wonderful. I don't have to type the data. I can cut and paste something straight from the internet into our medical system, not realizing that it can also work in the other way and the flow in the other direction. And that's where we need to make sure that integration is focused on cybersecurity and focused on protecting our patient data, because that's one of the key things they're entrusting us to do. And yes, we want convenience, but we mustn't lose sight of those patients and what their requirements are. And I think integration it's one of those things I find, I've got a door lock on my door when I leave my house. Of course, we all do. And I've got a fly screen as well, and they're both deadlocks. And both the keys are on the same ring, and it becomes this exercise in putting down whatever you're holding and unlocking the door. Now, convenience might be just not to have the doors. It would be wonderful. I could take whatever I'm carrying, my shopping, and walk straight in and out of the house. Wouldn't that be super easy and convenient? Yeah, absolutely. But it would also mean the shopping I just bought gets stolen by the neighbors or whoever in the street, because of course you don't have a front door. So we need to really balance convenience with the levels of protection that we're expected to deliver to our patients.
Rob, it's been an absolute pleasure sitting in and having a chat with you on cybersecurity, cyber threats, and what's to come in our environment. I think the good news is having thought leaders like yourself in the industry, especially in the technology space, in dental, working with enterprises. Thank you for coming on board. Good to great. And awesome having you here, and I look forward to connecting with you again, maybe on a topic that would probably, it'd be more like intriguing in a way that is positive, because as we had discussed earlier, it can be sometimes be seen on a grey scale, right? So, I need to sort of look into my cybersecurity, but it's not the priority because it hasn't landed. But I just wanted to thank you for today. Really, really excited to have you on the channel, and I look forward to speaking to you soon.
Thank you very much. If I could just leave one parting piece of advice for all the practice managers out there, please test your disaster recovery processes. Pick a time that is good and socialize it across your organization, but please test it, because what we see is a lot of the times organizations have backup and recovery processes that are never tested, and when they're under fire, they don't provide, they don't work.
Wow, thank you for that. I'm sure they'll take the advice. Have a great day.
Thank you, James. It was lovely being on your show. Across your organization, but please test it, because what we see is a lot of the times organizations have backup and recovery processes that are never tested, and when they're under fire, they don't provide, they don't work.
Wow, thank you for that. I'm sure they'll take the advice. Have a great day.
Thank you, James. It was lovely being on your show.
Take care.